May we have the roll call, please?
Here.
Here.
Present.
Here. Thank you. We will begin by having the invocation and Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand. Let's bow our heads. Dear Lord, we thank you for loving the city of Loma Linda and its citizens. We ask you to be present at our meeting today as we entertain issues before the city. Help us to make good decisions. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any items to be added or deleted?
No, sir.
Now is the time for public participation. We have one request to speak from Eduardo Gonzaga.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the council of Loma Linda. In times now where businesses are failing and closing, we are so proud to announce that we are opening business in the Professional Plaza in Redlands. Before I get started on that, though, I am so happy that you only allow 3 minutes time for me to give the talk. In grade school, my teachers always told me, speak more. 3 minutes? No, longer. So I'm glad that you put a limit. I'm also proud to see the POW MIA flag there. I have been for the past 25 years the VA POW physician. So I'm very happy to see that. I love those folks. During this time, and you notice I'm walking with a cane, I prematurely ended my career with an injury trying to help a patient at the VA. It resulted in a slip disc. So, as most of us are aware, when our careers are all of a sudden stopped, we also think about our income. And that forced me to look into the 401k, the TSP, and for some people call it the 403b. Well, the same plea that I've noticed from my patients in the 31 years that I practice internal medicine is, Doc, I don't know where to find money after I retire. The business that we started is primarily addressing those issues. About a year ago, I decided, I'm going to give it a try. Half of my TSP I'm going to go ahead and invest, and half I will leave with the federal system. Well, the past 6 months, of course, my TSP has taken a roller coaster dive. I've lost about $30,000. And the ones that I invested gained $40,000. So I am hoping that the people of Loma Linda, Redlands, and Colton will realize that this organization that we have established here, and the grand opening, by the way, is March 23 at the 1200 California Avenue, and we open that invitation to you, Mr. Mayor, and the rest of the council members. We hope that we are able to address the needs of Loma Linda, address the needs of financial and investment needs of Loma Linda, Redlands, and Colton, and the surrounding areas. I hope that this will help the council realize that there is a new business opening, and we are happy to do so. Our team, by the way, since most of us are, or all of us, are Seventh-day Adventists, we have a very unique name. It's called Team Revelation. You're supposed to laugh. But I thank you for giving me the time to speak to you and to address the council regarding this new business. And hopefully, this will be in good partnership with the surrounding cities and community. Thank you.
Where is it on California Street?
I'm sorry. It is on 1200. It's Professional Plaza.
Is that by Starbucks?
You know, if I were to give you a landmark, it's right across Pharaoh's Lost Kingdom, the former Pharaoh's Lost Kingdom.
So they're on that side. Okay.
Okay, that's a major landmark, I think, that everybody recognizes. California Plaza. Since I don't look for food, I don't know the restaurants yet. Not that they don't eat food, yes, you can tell, but I don't normally look for those. So thank you again for the opportunity, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Is there any other member of the public who would like to speak on any non-agenda items? Okay, no takers. Then we'll move to our agenda item 1. Is there someone here to receive the proclamation for the Ronald McDonald House? Okay, then we will be delivering the proclamation that is being made in honor of Southern California Walk for Kids Month for the Ronald McDonald House Charities. Next, item 2, we have presentation of our crime statistics for 2015, Sheriff's Department.
I have Lieutenant O'Brien will present the presentation.
Good evening, Council. I think most of you already got this, so this is going to sound redundant if you had a chance to look it over already. So we're going to talk about what happened in the year 2015 as compared to prior years. Do I have a clicker? The arrow. Gotcha. So if we want to start taking a look at some of our staffing levels, we'll notice that we've been at the same staffing level for quite some time. 2013, 2014, we were at 336 man hours. That's hours per week for deputies. And it's been about that, or we started that decline in 2012. And then this last year, we added that extra 40 hours of deputy time, which brought us up to 376, which is the closest we've been since 2011. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to refer or compare our current statistics to not only the prior year, but to 2011. Our traffic manpower has remained the same with one deputy, and we lowered our detective level in 2012, and it's been the same ever since. And we've always maintained that sheriff's service specialist for the last 5 years as well. So before I get started, I do want to tell you that some of the comparison of crimes in my presentation and what has already been provided to you is not an apples to apples comparison. And we're really learning this year more than ever. Crimes are being reclassified by the FBI, crimes are being reclassified by the Department of Justice, which forces us to change our statistics for that current year. But it's not retroactive to prior years. So all of those crime statistics from prior years remain the same, but anything current and forward gets changed. I'll give you a couple really good examples. The first one is related to the theft of a trailer. In prior years, stealing a trailer met the requirements of a grand theft automobile. 2 wheels, has a VIN number. We would always take it as a grand theft automobile. This year it's been changed to just a simple theft, petty theft or grand theft, depending on the valuation of that trailer. So that's one example. Another example is going to be the crime of rape. In a moment, I'm going to advance the slide, and you're going to see a slight increase of rape. And that's because the Department of Justice reclassified some sexual offenses to fall under that rape category. So we will see an increase of rape, but it will lower the other Part 2 crimes, which is where they were formerly. Does that make sense? Okay. So when we take a look at our crime statistics, we can look back and really, truly, the only crimes that haven't changed in the past 5 years is robbery, arson, and murder. And those are some pretty straightforward crimes. So if we take a look at this graph, the top line is going to show our total Part 1 crimes for the entire year. Of course, our Part 1 crimes are the big 9. Murder, manslaughter, rape, robbery, assault, burglary, larceny, and grand theft auto. You can see that robbery and
quick
assault
question.
are
What is larceny again?
theft. I'm sorry.
Just-
Larceny is theft.
So what's the difference between that and burglary?
Well, burglary would be breaking into a residence forcibly, walking into a residence with the intent to steal.
Okay.
Whereas theft would be just simply taking something. A very good example would be the burglary of a car. If a vehicle is locked and that person has to use some type of force to get into it, that would be considered a burglary. Rather, if the car was left unlocked and they simply open the door, that would be a theft. So we can see that in Part 1 crimes, robbery and assaults are down from the prior year, but we do see an uptick in burglary and larceny. I'll get into that in just a little while. So on the surface, it doesn't appear to be that big of a concern. You can kind of see steady ups and downs in each of these crimes. But there is, like I said, that uptick in burglary and larceny. So a lot has changed in Loma Linda, as you're well aware. We have the Loma Linda University expansion. We have Obamacare that has come to Loma Linda with the influx of patient care at the university. We have the VA expansion. So when we start comparing numbers, 2015 to 2011, what we really see the biggest spikes were in property crimes, which are burglary, larceny, and grand theft auto. So essentially, we are handling about 28% more burglaries, 30% more theft or larceny, and 88% more grand theft autos than we were in 2011. So in total, looking at that top line, we're looking at about 28% or 187 more Part 1 crimes this year than we were in 2011.
And again, why are we using 2011 as the benchmark?
Well-
I know that's when our staffing was similar, but
Right. Like, we want to compare the prior years to see what our increase was in the prior year, but if we want a good comparison as far as crime, where the biggest upticks were, 2011 is going to be the year we want to use for comparison. And in a moment, I'll get into some time it takes to handle some of this crime. And a lot of that time that we were using in 2011 is far less than the time we're using today. And that's important when we start looking at our staffing levels, because the time in 2011, we had less time dealing with crime, but more manpower. Now we have less manpower taking more time.
I understand. Thank you.
So if we take a look at this one, it's just going to be a comparison of our Part 1 and Part 2 crimes over the last 5 years. Looking at this year, last year compared to 2011, we see a 40% decrease in Part 2 crimes. And Part 2 crimes are pretty much anything other than those Part 1 crimes that I listed before. So Part 1 crimes increased about 3% since last year, but about 28% overall since 2011. Part 2 crimes, on the other hand, decreased 14% since last year, and about 40% since 2011. So we can take a look at our calls for service. Our calls for service have gradually increased over the last 5 years. Last year, we handled about 2,300 more calls for service, and compared to 2011, it's about 2,500 more calls for service. And these numbers on the graph are a true patrol coverage, which is what the officers are actually doing. It doesn't include calls that were just aired and the deputy did nothing. So in all of these calls for service, we can break these down between proactivity, which is what the officer does, and reactive calls, which is when a citizen of Loma Linda calls into our sheriff's dispatch requesting a deputy respond. And of those responsive calls for service, we can even break those a little bit more, because when they call Sheriff's Dispatch, they get broken down into priorities. So overall calls for service have increased about 30% since 2011. And you can see by that top line on that graph, they've just been gradually going up the entire time. Our response times have been pretty consistent across the board. We do see some slight variations compared to last year. We were about 29 seconds, we shaved about 29 seconds off of our overall time in emergency calls for service, and it goes all the way down to saving about a second of time on our priority 4 calls. When we compare that to 2015, we see a little bit more increase in response time. It varies anywhere between 1.5 minutes to 3 minutes for priority 4 calls. So our deputies are busier. We've seen that in calls for service. Our deputies are handling very different types of crime, from Part 1 crimes, Part 2 crimes, and it's taking them a little longer to get there. And again, a lot of that has to do with time. So this is just a quick slide to show how many deputy reports our deputies are drawing. And it's when you compare this year, 2015, to the previous year, you see about 78 more reports. And when we look at it from 2011, we see about 171 more.
You know, I just want to point out, it's you've done a marvelous job of collecting a lot of data, and I appreciate that, and I have reviewed this very carefully. And I am inclined, for a couple of reasons I'll state later, to support the initiative for additional police support. My concern is that the ongoing comparison with 2011 is misleading to the public that's watching, because a number of these reports show data where the crime rates, pick your category, are flat or higher in subsequent years after 2011. And so I want to be sure that our citizens understand that we're making the most dramatic comparisons by going back to 2011, because there are crime statistics that have improved or worsened in there, or in some cases are flat. So I am concerned about the message that we're sending to citizens by misusing the data, by limiting our comparisons to 2011.
Okay, that's very valid
Because there needs to be some summary statement here, whether we hire another police person or not. There needs to be some statement at the end that helps the citizens that are sitting here and are potentially watching. What does the crime look like in California? I mean, there are some disturbing things in here, but there's a lot of good news in here too.
No, you're absolutely right. If we take a look at our homicide rate, the city of Loma Linda has not had a homicide since 2012, and that is a very good thing. Our violent crime has remained steady throughout the years, which is also a very good thing. So when we take a look back at 2011, it's really just to see the gradual increase, but we do actually want to compare it to the previous years, and when we do that, we do see just a slight increase. We don't see a drastic or dramatic increase.
Thank you.
So if we move on to total arrests, we can see that in 2015, arrests dropped, felony arrests dropped by 75 or 23%, and misdemeanor arrests increased by about 93%. And the reason that is, it ties directly into Prop 47, which I'm going to get into in just a moment. But we're seeing the same trend throughout the entire county. So if we just compare it to the previous year, we are seeing an uptick in misdemeanor arrests and not necessarily felony arrests. So we can break those arrests down into those people who were actually booked into custody. And those people who were booked in custody were booked into one of two facilities, either the Central Detention Center or the West Valley Detention Center. Central Detention Center is our closest facility. It only takes about 15 minutes to get there, whereas in our West Valley Detention Center, it takes about 25 to 30 minutes to get there, and could take a little bit longer in any traffic. If we arrest somebody with some medical problems or concerns, we can't take them to our closest jail. We have to take them to our West Valley Detention Center in Rancho Cucamonga. And this is where the time comes in. This is a factor that is hindering our deputies with the amount of time they're spending in arrest. It's not uncommon for a deputy to make an arrest, make the hour drive, up to an hour drive to Rancho Cucamonga, wait an hour because that's truly the only booking facility in the valley that can accept those type of arrests, and then get an hour back to the city. That gets even more complicated when that person has some more serious or severe medical concerns and they have to go to a hospital to get a pre-booking jail check. We've seen deputies tied up there 4 or 5 hours, if not an entire shift. And again, that's a trend where it's taking that deputy out of the street and out of the city of Loma Linda and tying them up with that arrest.
As far as the arrests are concerned, do you guys, I would imagine you keep track of this, what percentage of those are related to crimes that were caused in Loma Linda? What percentage of those are arrested of people who actually live in Loma Linda? And what percentage of those arrests are people who just happened to pass through Loma Linda and got arrested because they got pulled over and they found that they had a warrant or something to that effect?
That would take a little bit more research on our part, a lot of manual research. I don't think there's an automated or quick way to develop that information, but it is something that we can look into if you'd like.
Which kind of leads me to the next question. We kind of have an idea of how much crime there is. Do we have any data as to how much of that crime was actually solved? In other words, were we able to find the perpetrators and end up prosecuting them?
Clearance rates is what you're asking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I don't have that information in front of me, but that is something I could easily get. Yeah.
Thank you.
The one thing is for sure is that all of these people who were booked were arrested within the city of Grand Terrace. Right? So we can see kind of a steady decline in traffic collisions. If we take a look at it between 2014 and 2015, we see a little bit of an increase, about 22 more total accidents. What we did see is a decrease in injury accidents compared to last year. This too takes up time. It's not uncommon for deputies to get tied up for 30 minutes to an hour on a traffic collision. And depending on where these collisions occur, they could utilize 1, 2, 3 additional officers or deputies. Luckily, we do still have that traffic deputy. We do pay for a sheriff's service specialist, both of which can be used to assist in this area. However, they don't work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, so all too often we see the patrol deputy taking care of those areas. So Prop 47, we all heard it. We all pretty much know what it is. It was the reduction of certain crimes from felonies to misdemeanors, and it made a lot of our drug crimes misdemeanors rather than felonies. Regionally, what we're seeing an increase in theft by about 24%, shoplifting an increase by about 107%, and that's really because the state of California in Prop 47 created its own shoplifting crime.
Can you tell me which graph that's coming off of the percentages? Are we comparing with across the years, or between 16 and 11, or?
That is I don't believe that is a graph in the handout that you have, but this is information that we're seeing regionally.
And this is valley-wide, not Loma Linda.
That is correct. This is not specific to Loma Linda. This is throughout the entire region. One thing that we were contemplating doing is comparing Loma Linda to some of our other contract cities. Unfortunately, we couldn't do that. So really the closest I could get is to compare Loma Linda to the rest of the valley. We are also seeing theft from vehicles by about 23%, and Part 2 crimes decreasing by about 38%. And this information, as I said, not specific to Loma Linda, but it's a very good example of the effects of Prop 47.
Just to go back a little bit to a specific crime, I noticed a significant increase in car thefts between 2011 and then 12, and then throughout the rest of the years stayed pretty steady. Is there a particular reason why that almost doubled compared to 2011? And I know that Dr. Daly mentioned the fact that 2011 is probably not the best way to compare it, because that could be a interesting year where maybe crime was down significantly that year, and so therefore it skews everything. But is there a particular reason why we have so many increase in car theft?
Grand
Theft autos, yeah.
Yeah, it's on page 1 at the bottom.
No, I see it, but in 2011 we had 84, and by 2014 it jumped to 176. I'm just curious, what do you think the reason was for such a huge spike?
I think there could be a lot of varying reasons, but probably the biggest I can see, and just the type of automobiles that are being stolen nowadays, is just that early model Honda. So my theory would be we have a college campus within Loma Linda who are driving some of those older cars. Those cars are getting stolen.
But the college has been here for many years, so is it
Yes.
they're talking to each other and saying this is a place that just has lots of cars available?
That could definitely be a possibility. I think their criminals kind of find some easier ways of stealing cars.
Mm-hmm.
And we see a lot of that happening.
Thank you.
So lastly is the slide on time. And I think I had a page in your handout just, focusing in on time. And this is just some of the time that our deputies spent on these types of calls within the last year. 963 hours just in burglary calls. I have up here and in your handouts 567 hours on mental illness. Last night when I was triple checking some numbers, that number is actually a little over 700. 530 hours on domestic violence, 500 hours on traffic collision, the list goes on. And when you add all of these up, they equate more than one full-time deputy sheriff. And these are the types of events that are tying our deputies up, that are keeping them or preventing them from conducting more proactivity. But I will say that the deputies of Loma Linda enjoy working Loma Linda. They're extremely pleasant people to deal with. I do not want to say that crime is out of control, because I do not believe it is. We're doing a very good job on it, but we can do a little bit better. So I'll open it up for any questions if you have them.
Looking at the cumulative data that you've presented, how would you assess the crime profile in the city of Loma Linda over the last 2-3 years? Because that's when we've heard the most, that's when I've heard the most complaints.
Right.
Are we in danger?
I do not believe you're in danger. We
What's
do
that?
see it. I do not believe you're in danger. I do see a gradual increase in some crimes, but I do not believe it. Like I said, I don't believe it's out of control. I don't believe the public's in any danger whatsoever. But there are factors within our society that are tying us up, mental illness being one of them. So when we're dealing with those incidents, when we're tied up at the jail or tied up trying to get somebody admitted into a behavioral health unit, that deputy is removed from the city. Therefore, response times start going up. Number of factors can go into it. I could go on and on,
Sure.
but that essentially that's it in a nutshell.
And I'm just curious about something else. When the adult bookings are actually down, how is it that it's, because I read all of this, I understand it's taking much longer to book adults in now than it used to. Help me understand that. That seems to be in a bit of a conundrum for me. There's fewer adult bookings, but they're all taking longer.
Sure. You're absolutely correct. But we do have a lot of factors that are coming to the surface, mental illness being one of them, health issues. Every day there's a new illness that prohibits somebody from being booked into jail. Over the last 2-3 years, those have grown and grown to what they are today. So what it was 2 years ago, even last year, is completely different than what it is today.
So in many ways, the population is changing that we're in Loma Linda that we're arresting. Well, I might be able to help out a little bit on that too. A lot of the policy and procedures are changing in regards to things that have to be done in a booking, and those are results of you name it, lawsuits, from inmates, statutes from the state, things like that. So, Donald Trump part of the problem could be. He's making America great again. So, part of that is in, say, five years ago, an arresting officer could take an arrestee to the jail. He was searched out real quick. The officer could fill out all the paperwork, and they had a medical questionnaire. The officer could ask him a bunch of questions. Do you have any of these medical issues? Boom, boom, boom. They get through. They book him. They give him to the booking officer. The booking officer has the officer sign, and the officer's out the door while the booking officer is still typing in all the information. So a couple of the things that have changed is, for now, as an example, now the officer has to wait until everything's finally completed. That's one. At the beginning, the guy has to be fully searched out over issues that have happened before now. They have to walk through a metal detector, and they can't be searched out by the deputy who brought him in. They have to be searched out by a deputy who's in the jail, and that deputy may not be available, so they have to wait for that deputy to get there. Then no longer can the deputies ask the medical questions. I mean, sometimes they can, but I mean, these are just things that have changed. So now a nurse has to see him, and the nurse may have a line of 10 or 12 guys in front of her that she's going over meticulously. And if she has a problem with any of the responses, yes, I have a toothache, oh, he's going to the hospital, I want to make sure he's cleared by a physician. Those are the things, just by the world becoming more litigious and more complicated, and everybody's afraid of being sued and things like that, they increase those times. The mental health thing, and I don't know if you're going to get into some of the challenges with the time on that, but there was a particular case, and I'll just tell you, I'm intimately familiar with some of the players. It used to be a standard practice if you had a suicidal person, and the person had a medical problem or issue, and they weren't extremely violent, you could call for an ambulance. You filled out the paperwork, the ambulance took him to the hospital, and that was it. You were on down the road. Well, a year or so ago, the Highway Patrol had an incident where they did the same thing. The ambulance drove the person to the hospital. The mentally unstable person was in the ER. He broke out of his restraints, attacked a nurse, and severely injured her. Well, all of a sudden that changed policy. Now you can no longer do that. The officer must accompany all the way through the process until he's screened by the physician, blah, blah, blah. I mean, some of these things make sense, but then in the background, we don't always realize the amount of time and other things that it takes away from. So I would ask, my question, is it safe to say that the way we prevent and reduce crime is by proactivity? Are guys actually driving around looking for criminals, showing the star, being visible, doing all that, versus if they're responding from call to call to call and they don't have the time to do that, is there a chance that, do the criminals know that our guys don't have the time to be driving around and maybe take advantage of that? I mean, I know it's an open-ended question, yeah. Kind of hard to answer, but
yeah, that would be hard to answer just because I don't know. Are they at home watching TV tonight? I can't answer that. I would hope not. I mean, I would hope they don't have this information to their firsthand to their knowledge, but it is a possibility. You mentioned mental health illness, and that's probably one of our huge time-consuming things last year. 567 hours spent on 144 calls. It wasn't even that many calls. That's an average of about 3.9 hours per call that deputy is on. And that's just a matter of getting him to the behavioral health unit, making sure he's medically cleared, and making sure that he's admitted to receive the proper care that he needs. So Mayor Pro Tem is absolutely right. It's not just policies within our department, but it's policies within every department. Every behavioral health unit, from the university to Redlands Community Hospital to Arrowhead Regional Medical Center, all have increased their policies and protocols to maintain safety to their staff and to the patient. And unfortunately, that draws a lot of time from our deputies.
What's the collaboration between Loma Linda's security with crime around here, and what kind of collaboration is there with him as well as with the VA? We
don't really have much collaboration with the VA, and that's primarily because if they have a crime or they make an arrest, they call us to handle that. They are sworn peace officers, however, they don't make physical arrests. They have an MOU with the Sheriff's Department to handle that kind of material. We have an excellent working relationship with the university security. They call us, we call them. It's a two-way street. They report things to us. They know that we are a busy organization, so they don't bother calling us for a lot of the little stuff. If we're getting a call from university security, it's for the big stuff that's sometimes out of their hands.
Okay, that's good.
Is there any evidence that the time it takes to book people in jail has to do with the fact that jails are super, super busy with multiple jurisdictions bringing people in?
Absolutely. While I couldn't pin a number on that, West Valley Detention Center is receiving arrestees from throughout the entire county, from the high desert, from the San Bernardino Valley region area, to arrestees booked in the Morongo jail who need to get booked down here because of a medical condition. So yes, that jail is extremely busy. The wait times can be very long.
I know this sounds kind of crazy, but have they thought, is there a legal issue why after someone gets arrested, it doesn't get placed in someone else's car and that deputy takes care of it from then on, and the deputy that arrested him stays here and does what they're supposed to be doing? Is there a logistical or legal issue that prevents that from happening?
Legal issue, I don't believe so.
Okay.
Nothing that's coming to the top of my head. Logistical, yes, absolutely.
You don't have the manpower
That
just
is
for
a
transport.
huge logistical issue, yeah. And just to expand on that, we do take advantage of that when we can. Obviously, if there are two arrests made simultaneously in the city, we're not going to take those two deputies to go arrest both of those people. We'll hand one off to the other, where only one deputy will get tied up with that.
Okay, thank you for that report.
I have one other comment, unless you were asking questions.
You can do it now, or you can wait until we actually talk about the dollar figure, but it's up to you. I have no question.
Just to summarize then, because I'm trying to get a grasp on this. The impression I have is that looking at the crime data, some of it's a little up, some more up, some's down, some's flat. But that we have roughly the same kind of crime as we used to have, with some noted variations. But that part of what's made policing more difficult is the bureaucracy and the crowding conditions in the jails, and that takes deputies away for extended periods of time, which leaves the neighborhood more open. Is that a fair statement?
That would be a fair statement, although I would hate to use the word bureaucracy or overcrowding.
That's fair enough.
Yes, that is a fair statement.
Because I want the citizens to know that we don't have a huge explosion of crime. We do have issues that we need to be dealing with.
That is correct.
And your assertion is that by having another active car out on patrol, that there's a deterrent effect and enhances the probability that we can pick up crime that we may not find until it's too late.
Absolutely. For example, if we add the second traffic car, it's not only handling the additional traffic collisions that are occurring in the city, it can be enforcing speed laws. Outside of that, they can be an additional unit to respond to some of our priority calls, our emergency calls for service. It's another person out on patrol that can help the deputies who are out there already.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, and we may call you back when we discuss item 7. Next, we have the consent calendar, and there's a comment from the city attorney on item 6.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item number 6 is a consulting agreement with Allied Telesys. My recommendation on that is that if you're so inclined to approve it, subject to final review and redrafting of the agreement by the city attorney's office. There are some concerns I had with the draft that was presented.
Okay, then is there a motion on the consent calendar with that proviso stated on number 6?
These are the people we've been consulting with over some extended time.
That's my understanding as well. It's time to formalize that, but the draft of the agreement that they submitted has some issues that I would like to convert into our more standard consultant agreement.
And I guess I'd like to ask who, city manager or associate city? Conrad. Have we compared fees, benchmarked their fees against other consultants?
Yes, we have. Primarily there's a company called Robert Half that does IT consulting, and their fees are significantly less than what that would be.
So when you say there, you're referring to
Sorry.
Telesys is less than the other.
Yeah, Telesys
Okay.
is significantly less. Basically, a desktop support guy in the open arena is somewhere in the $60 to $70 an hour range. We're significantly less than that.
Does that mean they're still qualified, though? They're still got good service, right?
Yeah, we get service. Actually, I hope so. He's taping the thing. So,
So
yeah, we get good service.
All of a
These
sudden,
are
my
not-
mic gets cut off.
these are not the people that did a presentation about internet fiber optic services in our city?
This is yes, this is the same group.
It is.
Yes, and what's going on is we had some of our staff leave to greener pastures, and in the interim, as we're negotiating this transfer to Allied Telus in completion or in total, rather than hiring somebody to fire again in 2 or 3 months, we're using some internal staffing that will then roll over to be the guys that will be here in the future.
So
This is a temporary to get us over that.
I see. But this has nothing to do with the agreement entered into them taking over our fiber optic.
No, this is purely the guys that fix the computers when they break on the desk.
But it's the same company that would take over the fiber optic?
Yes, it's there because that's part of what
I see.
they would provide as well as IT support.
Where are we at in that process of looking at that possibility?
We have worked through the major deal points, and we're kind of hammering out the language and making sure that we can get something that the city attorney's ready to look at.
Because it would be nice to get that going. I mean, I was asked about fiber optics this last week. Everybody's eager to try to get it to their homes that are not in existing old construction. So it would be great to get that process going.
Not that it's related or not related, but where are we at with the Verizon Files thing? Is that still a no-starter?
Verizon has never extended FiOS into the city other than a small segment in Mission Creek, not even the entire development.
Well, but it's not even full Files. It's only internet. It's not television. And their response has always been, when I talked to them, was that the city doesn't want it or doesn't allow it. I know we've already talked to them. Well, that's not true, but I just wondered if we're ever going to bring that back up again.
Verizon has shown no interest in providing that in the city. The other thing is on a national, kind of industry-wide, Verizon is no longer deploying or expanding their FiOS network.
Really?
They've offloaded their terrestrial voice to Frontier Communications, and there's rumors, discussion that perhaps Verizon is looking to exit the entire terrestrial market and just focus on cellular service. But they have not built out any new FiOS in a couple of years anywhere.
Really?
And they have sold their voice component of their terrestrial service to Frontier.
I'm stuck with Time Warner for a while.
And all of us here in the city are glad to have Time Warner.
My only point in asking the question was, when we have new services or we're renewing services, I'm not sure what the policy is to have competitive bids, because I know when you get into consulting services, it can vary hugely in what you get for those services. So it just seems like from time to time, and that would be up to city management to recommend. We should have some competitive bidding, I'm sure we do. But I have no objection to this.
Okay, then have we had a motion on the consent calendar? I don't remember whether someone moved it.
I'll
or
move
not.
it if we haven't.
Okay,
With that
with the proviso
caveat
on number
from
6.
the
Okay.
attorney.
And is there a second for that?
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. It's unanimous. Now back to law enforcement. Item number 7, a proposal to appropriate extra money this year and plan for budgeting the entire year next year.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, when I prepared this staff report, I received a draft proposal for next fiscal year from the county sheriff, which is called a Schedule A. So if you want to increase the deputy by one position, the cost will be approximately $256,600.
What was that again?
It's $256,600
Next year.
So I use that number. If you want to increase the staff for this fiscal year, I divide it by 12 and multiply by 4. That's how I come up with the $85,600. But then I was told by the lieutenant that it's going to be very difficult to get additional deputy for this fiscal year because, like he said, the last meeting is you have to go out, recruit, and have the deputy go through the academy and so forth. So it's going to be difficult. So at this point, I think I'd like to open a discussion between the council to see if you would like to add a deputy into the budget for next fiscal year, and this way we don't have a conflict of interest. And so,
Well, yes, this is strictly the budgetary issue at this point in time, and at some future time, presumably the county would submit an amendment to the contract. The draft that we received is not formal in that nature yet.
So give us some budget context. I mean, it's $260,000. Where would it come from? Is it money sitting there? What are we doing with it now?
sorry. So what happening is for this fiscal year, for example, our contract with the county sheriff is $2,952,604. Okay, and we're close to $3 million. And this is the proposed for next fiscal year is going to be, again, keep in mind, maybe, no, you know what? I'm sorry, I'm going to use the mid-year number. The mid-year number that they gave it to me was $3,236,553. And the number for next year is $3,493,109. So the difference is $256,600. And what he did was he just add additional deputy. But a lot of time is when you add deputy, you also add the part of office specialist, motor pool. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just reading from the Schedule A. So when you add a deputy, you not just have one. You just add part of liability and
There's the whole support
liability
structure.
goes up.
Yeah.
Personal liability, vehicle liability. The motor pool doesn't go up. But you're not talking one person, you're talking hours, so that's a guaranteed body.
Yeah.
So if a guy goes on vacation for 6 weeks, which they're entitled, there's always somebody there. So you're paying for that backfill position.
Just to help out with a little bit of clarification on cost, isn't it correct? Some of the bigger stations where they don't fund by hours, they fund by positions. They have enough positions so when people go on vacation or whatever, there's no need to backfill. The cost, the reason why our cost difference is higher at the smaller cities is that you're paying for all of the time. And so if the guy goes on vacation, if he calls in sick, whatever, they move somebody else into that spot. So that's why it's a higher cost than say just one guy by himself. But at a station with 100 guys, it's easier to absorb those on and off, days off, things like that. In a small city like this, those don't apply.
So it's almost like an airport, less flights, the cost goes up for everybody. Since we're such a small city,
No, you could go back to that original cost, but then remember, if you only have X amount of people and they're here you have less people out, even less coverage.
Well, you could pay $185,000 for a deputy sheriff, and he got injured on duty. He could take a year off, and you wouldn't have anybody for a year.
That's good. That's a very good point. Yeah.
So again, budget context.
Yes.
Are we looking at, we have, our budget is flush, or are we going to be squeezed in other places in our budget by doing this?
Yes, like I mentioned at the last meeting when I did the mid-year budget review. Right now we have money in reserve that we could use part of the money that we gained from surplus from last year to help pay for this position for sure for the next 3 years. Everything is break even, so we can have money in reserve from general fund to help pay for this, but for next year we are in the process of doing the budget for next year, so I'm going to see the general fund expenditures and revenue for next fiscal year. So, and at the same time, at the last meeting, I mentioned what's coming into town. We can have hotel coming to town. We have more business coming to town. I think the revenue will help offset to pay for this deputy position. Sir.
Okay, any further questions, or is this something that requires, because there's no intent to actually appropriate additional money for this year because we won't find anybody, is there a need for a motion about a budget item for next year?
I just need direction from you, really. If all of you said, yes, Jarb would like to have additional deputy, then on the proposed Schedule A will say will be a revised contract for the Schedule A. So this way, when they bring in a new Schedule A, we'll have additional 40 hours.
I believe the new Schedule A will have an additional 80 because we added 40 last year.
Correct.
However,
Oh yes, yes. This is what you have.
We did that with overtime, so it's going to look like a bigger amount of money because we filled that position with overtime, so it was not on the previous year's Schedule A.
But didn't you say you could only do one overtime at a time, which means you will do one overtime?
I tried.
No, probably not.
So let me see if I understand this correctly. So the overtime person is going away and we're replacing him with a regular deputy. Well, our understanding was we were going to continue that and add an additional deputy.
You can't do overtime anymore.
Well,
We got 2 new. 8 hours.
Yeah, what he's saying is 2 additional spots. There's one coming because that overtime position's going away and it's becoming a full-time spot.
okay, and then we're adding one more on top of that.
So he's asking if that's the direction.
And that's that the $250,000 would take care of that for next year. Now, back to the motion. This is the way the item is written is to approve appropriations of $85,000 for this fiscal year. So technically, that should be approved as an amendment to our existing budget.
But I found out that they cannot provide us with additional deputy for the remaining 4 months. So
I follow you. Okay.
yes, so right now what I need from you is the direction from you that said, yes, Jarb, we want additional deputy and to be included for next fiscal year.
So just for my clarification, for the $3.5 million,
Yes.
how many deputies are we going to have in the city of Loma Linda at any given time?
That's a different question from how many are total. You know, this-
I have it. It's right here.
yeah, it'll now be.
How many patrol cars will be cruising
Do
on
we
the streets?
do we want to announce that?
I have a right to, yeah, I want to know.
Why not? We're not a military base.
Yeah, But, you know, if someone has a distraction strategy, this information could be useful.
Because the follow-up question is going to be, once we add this patrol cars, how are we going to measure success at the other end? Or should we expect to see a decline in crime? Or will we be happy if it continues to be fairly stagnant, as it has been? Or how do you measure success on this?
The only way to measure with the change in the reporting between 14 and 15 would be the calls for service. Because the requirements for certain crimes have changed, the comparison of 14 and 15 does not even look accurate.
Sure,
So
but
it
at
will
least
then
we'll
be-
have 2 years we can compare now.
It would be 15 and 16.
Right.
So you have to eliminate 14. So it would be at that point you could do an equal comparison unless the voters change the laws again.
But we're
Hopefully
only
we don't
going
do
to
that.
add the positions for the second half of 16. Really,
I-
we're only
I'm sorry?
adding if we did this, it was only adding the positions for the second half of 16.
Absolutely.
So that's hard too. But
It would be
I-
the calls for services where you would see the difference. Do calls for service go down or do calls for service increase?
the question I had, and I probably should have just asked it earlier, and I don't know if you guys feel comfortable saying this, but I guess my question is, in your professional recommendation, knowing, I mean, it's hard to say. None of us can really predict the future. However, we know that the VA hospital is coming in. We know about the expansion at the university. We know about how things are changing regionally with Prop 47 and all that. And I know Dr. Daly won't like this because he likes cold hard numbers. However, do you predict that things are going to take more and more time and increase, not necessarily crime per se, but just calls for service and all that type of stuff? Would that be a safer way to talk about it instead of saying, not necessarily?
Yeah, because as you know, the legislative requirements continue to increase on law enforcement, which takes longer times to fulfill that obligation at any given call. And we've also seen, and we don't know why, but DUI driving has increased substantially over the first part of this year, and they're running into things, and we can't figure that one out either. Legalization of alcohol has not occurred in the city, so you have people driving through the city intoxicated and running into things. And in fact, we're sending 4 or 5 guys to DUI and drug training because that is an increase throughout the nation, people driving under the influence of drugs.
It's the Trump effect.
Personally, I think we have a significant amount of drivers on the roads in Loma Linda under the influence of prescription drugs due to it being a health care community.
Yeah.
And I think they're starting to run into things. You're now going to see more people traveling between the 2 VAs. They're not moving everything that direction. I've talked to people that visit the VA, and their trips are now split to 2 different VAs.
There's another statute. There's another statute that was enacted by our great state legislature recently, and it takes effect in 2018, I believe, and that's the statistical reporting of race and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
So every peace officer in the state of California, is it 2018?
It's 2018 or 2019, I believe, depending on the size of your agency.
Okay. And it's a hard and fast rule, and basically what the state has said is every single contact you have with someone in the public, if they're a victim, if they're a suspect, if you stop and talk to them in the supermarket, you must write down your perceived, you can't ask them, that's strictly forbidden, but you must write down your perception of their race, their gender, their religion, their ethnic background. Yes, hold on. And you must keep a record of that for examination by state officials, and there is no money that's awarded to anybody by the state to actually obtain all that information, to record it, to disseminate it, to house it, to whatever. But every police agency in the state, and if I'm wrong, yell at me, they must record every single contact. So if you stop to say hi to somebody and you have an interaction with somebody, you must note, and you must note what you perceive to be their race, their religion, their ethnic background.
Who pushed this? The KKK? I don't understand how this helps people who don't believe
Well,
in
that's
profiling.
because there was such a big scare that, law enforcement is killing our poor
Yeah,
innocent.
but it sounds like they're requiring you to profile people.
That was the response of the state of California.
It sounds counter to the left wing.
Well, I don't want to get into discussion on that. I
I
want to
do.
go back to what Dr. Daly said.
No,
I
but
do, and I'm in
my
charge.
my point is we aren't even talking about that yet and what kind of time and effect that is going to have. And so what I think a lot of our discussion is that even if we only see minor increases right now, I think a lot of us and a lot of the citizens are worried about getting in front of something instead of trying to be reactive and catch up if we see things coming.
But I think Dr. Daly's question was a good one, which is how do we measure the success?
No,
What are the
fully agree with
benchmarks that we give ourselves to say, yes, this was a good investment, and here are the results of what we've achieved?
I think
And
that
I'll tell you my 2 cents, and then we can go from there. I mean, the trend looks like we're going up. We can come up with a lot of reasons for why it's happening. I think we all agree that's some increase. To me, if we can show that adding this one deputy, that trend has slowed down, or maybe we're fortunate and it's actually flattened, then I would say that's a success. If that doesn't happen, I'm ready to say we need to add another one. And then if 6 months later does not happen, I'm ready to add another one. And the reason I'm taking such a proactive approach is because our city in the last 2 years has brought in some businesses with increased revenue. And I remember talking to the business, and he said, one of the advantages of doing the same thing we did with your city, another city in Chicago, outside of Chicago, is that they were able to use that money to improve their infrastructure and the police. And I think if we have the money, I see no problem with increasing the forces until we see significant decrease in crime. And I want to be proud to say, as a result of our efforts here and the putting good use of our resources, we have done something about it, and we're doing it to do it gradually. If maybe one deputy can do the job, if not, add another one. And if not, add another one. So I'm ready to go in that direction. I just want to let you know.
And regardless of the amount of personnel or however that works, I do believe that business is attracted to safer communities. I mean, we know that businesses and restaurants from our neighboring city are knocking at our door already because they want to be in a community where they feel safe and whatnot. So even some of this stuff might be perception, but I think we need to tune into what the perception is of our residents and business owners too. So that's all.
And I agree with you. I just also want to balance that with
absolutely.
being good stewards of hard-earned tax money.
You're absolutely
that
right.
we collect as well.
That sounds very Republican.
We
gotta tell you.
got hammered with the water rates and a few other things, and I just want to be sure we don't start raising property taxes now.
No, you're right.
Well, I don't know that we have much authority to do that.
Well,
but
whatever
Okay.
taxes we would raise, where would we find the money?
yeah. Well, my feeling on setting goals for this kind of a thing is, unless you can do a double blind, half of the town gets the increase and the other half doesn't, and you don't tell them who they are, you really can't prove much, because what would have happened without the increase? Don't know. You can't follow in an alternate universe where we didn't do it. So I'm with Ovi. I kind of like the idea of if it's not enough, hit them again. So.
You guys make more money than I do.
Well, but I mean, to be honest,
be so
one of the
sure.
business we brought into town is equivalent to having a super Walmart in town without having all the challenges of having super Walmart. So our city is in a very good financial position to put whatever resources we need to make it a better city. And to me, making it a better city is trying to not nip it in the butt, but actually, and be proactive, but actually go the opposite way. So it's not so much of, well, we're seeing an increase, let's add a deputy. How about adding a deputy so we can create a decrease? You follow me? That's kind of where I'm coming from. And most cities are not in a position to do that. Most cities are going bankrupt trying to do that. We're in a very unique position.
It's really unfortunate, but I will tell you firsthand experience, and I'm sure both of them have had it in their career also. I have talked to many people that I've arrested or dealt with that have been in custody over the years, and they will tell you they target areas that are easier than other areas. They know, and I'm not saying that applies to our city right now. I'm not trying to draw parallels, but criminals are not as dumb as we think they are. If it's easier to go to one particular city because for whatever reason they will go to that city. So we have a kind of a term that we like to use now where I work, and that's harden the target. And I think that's where this council and this city is going, as we harden this target.
And I don't want to cut Dr. Daly because I wanted you to say something, but one of the observations I've made from looking at the weekly crime reports is you're actually seeing some of the folks who are committing these crimes or getting arrested are actually Loma Linda residents. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that we still have a very high percentage of renter type of residents versus homeowners. And they're basically starting to, create problems in our city. And that's bound to happen, which goes back to why all of us got elected many years ago, is we want to be proactive and trying to bring in quality housing, not that the type of housing, or try to improve the existing housing to increase the type of folks that we want in our community. And we're seeing the aftermath of some of the decisions that were made literally 20, 30, 40 years ago. I mean, I can't tell you down Popular, and I agree with our sheriff. I mean, there's a lot of drug use, a lot of people under the influence. It's mind-boggling, and how many people are being arrested for that. And it's all technically tends to happen around the low-income apartments. It's a fact of life.
Okay, do you have enough direction? Okay. Yeah, you're adding more direction? Okay. They've got a lot of direction.
And the other component of that too is, and it's not just public safety type of stuff, but it's the roads and the bridges and how you make the city look. And we have to give Jarb a ton of credit for keeping up on that, because I mean that's a big part of why people want to be here and live here. And if you look at houses, I know we've been looking for my in-laws for a while now, and houses go on the market here and they're gone within a day or two, and that's all parts of the city. It just, for whatever reason, people want to live here. And I think that's in part because of how the city looks and how it's run and how it's policed and how it's serviced by our fire EMS. So I think all of you guys deserve a big amount of credit, and I appreciate it.
Okay, that's it for the old business. There's no new business. Any reports of councilmen?
There is, in the Meridian facility just down the street here on Barton, we're seeing a lot more parking on the street on Barton. And I've had at least 3 people talk with me and say they're having difficulty exiting out because traffic flies around down Barton and they can't see for the cars and trucks that are parked there. And then what exacerbates the problem is they're trying to get over to the central median so that they can do a U-turn and get going the other way. And it gets a little hairy out there. And what can we do about that?
I'm glad you bring this up, because at the last Wednesday night, which is a proposed project to just the east of that, and staff recommend denial, and it will come to you eventually. But what we can do on that is we can take it to the traffic advisory committee, and we can do some red curb, at least block off a couple of spaces so that the people that are coming out from the parking lot can see the oncoming traffic.
Is it my understanding that part of the reason that's happening is because there's construction in the back of the existing parking lot, and that's the reason they're parking in the front? That's what I was told, because I went to the dentist there.
It helped, but it's been happening since before.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of cars there. I'm just shocked how much business there is.
My dentist is over there to find parking there. It's very difficult. And I'm glad you bring this up because that was my concern about the traffic on Barton Road, and to add another traffic so close to Newport. And you know, we did receive complaint from the people that use the post office. It's getting pretty bad, and to have another businesses right there with the driveway so close to Newport, I can't approve that. So
Because that's federal.
well, we have a new yes, the post office is federal, but we have a new private proposal that they bought the property from the post office.
Oh, yes, yes, I know what you're talking about.
So again, it's coming.
Which will only exacerbate.
But right now, I'm bad guy because But yes, sir, I will bring it up and at the next traffic question meeting.
Any other reports of councilmen? Okay, then we'll move to item number 8, reports of officers. Outbreak of a citrus disease.
We'll keep it short and sweet. For Councilman Daly, this is the Asian citrus psyllid. It is a sap-sucking hemipteran, basically related to the aphids, kind of like the mosquito of the plant world. They land on green, the new shoots and new leaves of citrus plants, bury their proboscis in there and cause damage. The other thing they do, just like a mosquito, is they bring with them a bacteria called the Huang Long Bing disease. I'm going to call it the HLB disease, all right? But essentially, this is transmitted once the psyllid sticks its proboscis in the leaf. It then becomes a vector and then transmits that disease onto the next plant it feeds on. That's kind of what you see on the bottom of the leaves on an infected plant. In 2012, the first HLB disease was found in Southern California. It's that green dot right there in the middle. That is the only one that has been found so far in California. The brown and red dots are where the insect vector is commonly found. The assumption is that the tree that was infected by a graft from a tree either brought from Asia or Florida, where they currently have infections. We are trapping. You see the yellow tabs hanging in the trees. They trap for the psyllids. The original or initial signs are sections of the tree turn yellow. That'll happen in the first year or so. If it's a section or part of the canopy, it's probably some type of a disease related. But you know, those of you that had citrus trees, it's also related to nutrients and nitrogen and watering and other issues will turn the tree yellow as well. You kind of see the leaves, they turn green and yellow, splotchy. It's a, make sure I get my notes here. Kind of as the leaves become damaged, as the tree progresses, the leaves kind of turn up instead of hanging down. They lose their leaves, and the fruit doesn't really ripen. You end up with deformed yellow or green fruits. That's why it's called the citrus greening disease. There is currently no treatment for a tree. Once it's infected, it must be eradicated, and typically they take the trees around it as much as they can to eliminate any other vectors.
Are you now describing the insect or the Huang Long Ding?
The insect. So
okay.
The HLB disease is transmitted by the insect. So there is no cure for the disease, and all the activity is on limiting the spread of the insect. What's that? It is the HIV of the plant world, yes. Let me get back to it here, make sure I'm hitting the right stuff. It is so endemic in San Bernardino County that they've even stopped treating residential trees, and essentially residential trees are treated as a write-off at this point. And the groves are heat treating, which is what we see, and spraying. That's why you're seeing a lot more spraying in the groves, trying to limit the insect. from passing that on. What we can do is kind of the same stuff should have been doing for the last 50 years. We've heard all our lives. Don't move stuff from one place to another. Don't do grafts. Buy legitimate trees from legitimate people. And kind of the same quarantine things that kind of make great sense for all of us. And like I said, it's at this point, the insect is all over the place. The insect causes damage, but the disease, the HLB disease, was only in the one tree in Los Angeles, and it is found in Texas, Florida, and in the Central Valley, and is pretty endemic through most of Asia. So what we're trying to do, once again, is limit the insect and then limit the movement, if anything, that will bring that disease with. Thank you. And then the next one, we have Jim Shipp from the Historic Commission to do a brief presentation on the Historic Commission and the Mission Historic District. The purpose of this is we have a significant amount of development coming through the planning department in that off of California, north of Mission Road, and both east and west side of California, which is the Mission Historic District. And there's historic elements and considerations that we need to be aware of as this area develops.
Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Thank you for letting me speak to you for a few minutes about the Mission District. The Historical Commission has been asking that I talk to the Planning Commission and to you as well, because as Conrad said, there's a lot going on. I like to refer to the Mission District as Loma Linda's Fertile Crescent. It's our Mesopotamia, if you will. To tell the story of Loma Linda and to tell the story of civilization in Loma Linda, you really have to start on Mission Road. That's a picture of a monument that is no longer there. It was stolen a few years ago. We've made a replica, but have been prevented by the Daughters of the American Revolution from putting it up because they want to do it themselves. So our history of civilization in Loma Linda goes back, anthropologists suggest, about 2,000 years. The area that we know as Loma Linda includes the Mission District. I think that's, for planning purposes, called Planning Area D still. The Shoshonean people, the Wachama and Cahuilla, settled in this valley at least 2,000 years ago, probably longer, and had culture, they had trade, and the street that we call Mission Road today was an established Indian trade route from before anyone was keeping records. And so that is how significant that is, because it existed before any Europeans were here. The Spanish were the first to pass through Loma Linda. The first group was Pedro Fages and his conquistadores exploring inner California in 1772. Francisco Garces came again through our valley, probably traveling along Mission Road because that was the native trade route. And then in 1810, a Franciscan father, a missionary, Francisco Dumas, is credited with naming this valley San Bernardino. And so if from that time on, if you were to speak of San Bernardino, you were talking about the Mission District, talking about Mission Road and the Indian village that was there. And within about 9 years, they established a mission outpost, really a ranch or a farm. Never became a full-fledged mission because of politics and the end of the Spanish era here, and created something that was to become our primary water source for 100 years, and that's the Sanha, which traveled about 50 feet north of Mission Road, and it's now been extensively dug. It's been studied to death. We know exactly the alignment of it, and that figures into the district as well, because the Sanha is a California landmark. This is the best guess, according to the San Bernardino County Museum, of what the estancia on Mission Road looked like. We know quite precisely where it was. It's private land. It's under the Edison Tower, so it's in the easement, and it's never been dug or excavated. There's been no on-ground study there, but we know quite precisely where that first mission outpost was. Several phases of development took place, and all of them had some function along Mission Road. The Lugo family took over the entire valley, the San Bernardino Valley. They paid the equivalent of $800 in cattle hides for the valley. They believed they bought the San Bernardino Mountains with it, although the United States didn't agree with that later on. They established a cattle ranch here. They'd been successful in Compton and other places. The Rancho de Lugo was very successful in the Los Angeles area, but when they got here, they had about 10,000 head of cattle, and most of them died in the Great Blizzard of 1848, killed virtually all of their cattle and a lot of their horses. So they were anxious to leave after just a very short number of years. And some Mormon settlers turned up at exactly the right time and purchased the entire valley from the Lugos at substantially more than the Lugos had paid for it. And a number of those Mormon pioneers ended up settling along Mission Road. Now, the Mormons established San Bernardino as a city, downtown, right where the courthouse is today. But a number of their people did not like living in the city. They wanted to live in the country. They liked the Sanha. And Anson, who's pictured there, planted the first citrus in our valley. So I guess we could blame him, Conrad, for the psyllid problem. But in the meantime, for the next about 100 and some years, that became the economy of this side of the valley. We do still have the home of Anson and Elizabeth Van Leuven. It's named publicly the Mountain View Mansion, but it's the Van Leuven Mansion, and that's on Mountain View Avenue, and it's a lovely place to visit. And our city owns a facade easement on that building, so it has some protection under the law. That's what it looks like. Other Americans started arriving rather rapidly once the railroad had come in the 1870s, and a lot of Americans started to buy land along Mission Road. The Sanha, that water supply that the Native Americans had dug at the direction of the Spanish missionaries, was an essential part of why we have citrus here, because this is too arid for citrus without water, and there simply was not enough water in San Mateo Creek to water the citrus. So the Sanha led to the citrus, and that brought a whole bunch of American families here. The Coles, the Curtises, the Frinks, and others developed substantial citrus groves. Here's another snow event in Loma Linda. It does happen. The Frink adobe is still with us. Built in 1870, it's our oldest standing structure in the city of Loma Linda. It's on Mission Road. It's currently under your care as the successor agency to the redevelopment agency, and sometime within your terms, probably it will be disposed of, or I shouldn't say disposed of, but somehow rendered other than just in stasis. Something will change concerning the Frink adobe. The Cole House is an interesting place because it has a direct story to tell about the establishment of Loma Linda as a community. James Cole, who built this house in 1886, went on to be a principal partner in the Redlands Motor Road, our Dinky Railroad, and he was also the primary owner of the Mound City development, which was to develop what we would consider mostly the university property in downtown Loma Linda. It was his plan, along with some of his other fellow owners, to develop a town here called Mound City. It was an utter and complete failure. Nobody got off the train at Mound City. Nobody was buying land. They sold a couple of lots and eventually plowed up all the streets, and it became fruit orchards, mostly not citrus, amazingly, other kinds of fruit. So that Mound City went on to become Mound City number 2 in 1888, at which time the new owners of Mound City decided that they would attract people with a very fancy hotel, the Mound City Villa, pictured there. If you have thought, well, the Loma Linda Sanitarium looks a lot like that, That is absolutely true, because that Mound City Villa was in 1900 renamed Loma Linda as a health spa, a very fancy health resort, which again was an utter failure, and allowed John Burden then in 1905 to buy it at essentially fire sale price, just way, way worse than price than what it actually cost the Mound City developers to build in the first place, and that eventually became the Loma Linda Sanitarium. So the first Mound City was an absolute bust. The Bryn Mawr tract, where we are all right now, this is part of the 1888 Bryn Mawr. If you look at the top left, that's approximately where the Loma Linda Medical Center is. And then the bottom right would be Bryn Mawr Avenue. So almost to Bryn Mawr Elementary School. So those are the confines of the Bryn Mawr tract, which was a Drew and Crawford production that was also an utter failure. And nothing really for many years came of Bryn Mawr. It eventually was sort of resurrected as a small community, but it never succeeded on the grand scale that Henry Drew expected. The Mound City Villa, of course, went on to become the Switzerland of America, apparently, if you believe the advertising. I don't know exactly where the ski slopes were or any of that, or the cheese, but nevertheless, that's part of our story, and it emanated from the Cole House, which is now resting comfortably in Heritage Park. Concern about protecting that birthplace of civilization in our community started back in the 1980s. The city purchased the land for Heritage Park in 1984, and then in 1988, the city commissioned the McKenna Hathaway Windshield Survey, which still is part of our resource, our Bible, if you will, about the cultural resources in our community, the old buildings and their significance to us. Then the big thing that happened that really raised concern was the channelization of San Mateo Creek. That allowed the development then of the whole Mission District, which was a floodplain and couldn't really be developed prior to that time. Now interest was developing, and so by 2000, the City Council, Planning Commission, Historical Commission all realized that there was going to be tremendous pressure to develop all of that open land. Some of it was vacant, some of it was citrus. We began to have public workshops and public hearings. There were at least a dozen of those in the next couple of years. The Dangerman Group was commissioned to prepare a report on the Mission District, which they finished in 2002. That was presented then to the City Council in the form of an ordinance, which was approved by the City Council. It's now a part of our city ordinances. And the purpose of it was to preserve as many of the cultural resources, the buildings or places, things inside the district that we could possibly save that would contribute to telling the story of our community. The other part of it, the flip side of the HMOD, the Historic Mission Overlay District, is to establish development standards so that when you enter that area, that historic district, you can feel and recognize that there's something different going on there. That it's not just a cookie cutter Orange County or Rancho Cucamonga kind of modern American stucco quasi-mission district, but a real historic district. And the reason why we do this is that we need to be able to tell our story. We need to know where we came from. I tell the third graders when I take them from Bryn Mawr on a history tour every year, a town does not fall from the sky. I didn't invent the city. None of us invented this city. It was passed down to us from people before. And it's part of our duty as citizens and as caretakers to keep some remnants of that past alive to tell the story of how this became the city that it is. People say to me, well, Jim, you can't save them all. And boy, I know that more than anything. I think our Historical Commission processes an awful lot of demolition requests. But we try to be careful about that. We try not to destroy everything from our past, but to retain some things that are super important to telling the story. So how has the HMOD functioned so far? The design of the Heart and Surgical Hospital the historical displays that are inside. Have you seen the mural inside? Christine Curry, local artist, did that, commissioned to prepare that. And the Sanha Trail, which starts at our border with Redlands and goes all the way to California Street, is a big part of that. Every developer so far who has developed on the Sanha has contributed to the trail. So that is an open public trail that goes all the way from the border of Redlands behind the Heart and Surgical Hospital all the way to the ARCO AMPM complex on California Street. It's not finished yet. So that's one of the reasons I'm here. The Mission School revitalization contributed to the district because a new school was not built, and I know, politically that was not in everybody's best interest, but certainly historically we have something that contributes to the story of Loma Linda. When the developer came to the Historical Commission to build an ARCO AMPM shopping center, they initially presented a rather mundane set of stucco buildings in the current style. And the Historical Commission asked if, with the leverage of the ordinance, if they could go back and rethink that. So they went back and rethought it, and they came back with 4 buildings which reflect historic buildings in Loma Linda's history, which are no longer with us. The 1915 Loma Linda Hospital, which none of us have seen in person. The 1904 Mission School is now the Kuka's restaurant. The first Loma Linda Foods Factory replica is Starbucks, and the ARCO AMPM store is actually a replica of the packing shed that existed on that site. The Frank Adobe is still preserved. It's the only building in Loma Linda that's on the California Register of Historic Places. The look of Mission Road, this sleepy, kind of slow lane that you drive through now if you have a few minutes, is because of the district. It certainly would not have been developed that way if the district had not existed. The look of the homes along Mission Road is intended to be compatible with the old construction that's there. The Cole House, which figured so much in our past with the Dinky and the development of Mound City, has been moved to Heritage Park. The Curtis Fisk home, which represents the Curtis family, very important in the development of the citrus industry, and the Fisk home, it was later owned by the Fisks, very important people in the development of the San Bernardino County Museum. Also, that movie appears in the Oliver Stone movie Nixon, where it represented Richard Nixon's boyhood home.
Is that any relationship to the Fisk that was Carnegie's right-hand person that ran the steel mills? That's somebody else?
Jim Fisk was involved in mills. I don't know that there was a Carnegie connection. There could be, okay. But he was involved in silver and gold, and eventually retired and gave a large contribution bequest to the county museum. And the big rusty dome is the Fisk Gallery.
Okay.
So, yeah, I could check on that for you, Mr. Popescu. The Van Ufflin Dairy Home is an example of an existing building which has been retained in private ownership, and it contributes in that it is part of our story as a community, but it also doesn't look out of place because the buildings that were built around it are built in some historic styles that are expressed in the district ordinance. Even the design of the VA outpatient center is a reflection of the district. Because it lies within the HMOD, and it's in the commercial style, which is one of the styles that the ordinance recommends for business purposes, and so that was the style that they chose, and it is actually a historic style. It's an interesting style, not the most lively, but yeah. So the reason I'm here is to share our enthusiasm with you and hope that you will share it with us for how the Mission District looks and feels when it's built out. And we hope that you will support the Sanha Trail because there are several more developments between California Street and Heritage Park which should contribute to the trail and we hope that you'll help hold developers' feet to the fire and make sure that that becomes a connected part of our trail system, and work to preserve and protect the Frank Adobe and other resources. We've done a fairly poor job with monuments and signage. Those were required for some of the projects, and somehow through the cracks, a few projects got finished without the signage and the monuments in place. I noticed lately that Yucaipa has got a tremendous entryway for their downtown, their old town. I'm not suggesting that we need anything like that, but there should be something. It could be as simple as what Redlands has just done at the Alabama Street area, just to let people know that they're entering a special kind of area, something to do with the Mission District. There are more developments in the very near future for Heritage Park. We hope it to be a place that mixes both commercial, professional use with museum and community gatherings and things like that. And I would encourage you to be a part of Loma Linda's ongoing story by supporting the Mission District, because it will be built out very soon. We would have had this conversation 12 or 13 years ago had there not been a recession, had the developments that were already in the approval process not collapsed, and it would all be over and done by now. But we get a fresh start and another opportunity. So thank you for allowing me to talk to you for a few minutes. And of course, a teacher can't go away without assigning homework. So I have for each of you compliments of the city, 2 books, Sunshine, Citrus, and Science, which was written by a Loma Linda University faculty member, the late Dr. Keld Reynolds, and then the Images of America book, Loma Linda, which was prepared a few years ago by the Historical Commission. Maybe I can give Mr. Lenartz to someone and make sure he gets this. It's optional homework. You don't have to read them all. But I hope sometime you will. I think it's very lively and interesting reading, especially the one the Commission did. It's just a picture book. So really easy. Anyway, thank you very much. And I'll be available for questions if you have them.
I wanted to add that your presence here is very timely. I was just talking to Kathy yesterday for about 40 minutes, and we were just talking about what was happening on Area D. And one of the things that she reminded me was about the Historical Mission Overlay District. And she says, Ovi, make sure as projects move into that area, one of the things it needs to do, among all the things you explained to us, is maintain a rural feeling.
Yes,
well,
that was primary.
We haven't quite done that yet. I know we have about 60 acres of open space, but we're going to have to really keep the developers' feet to the fire, not to just develop minimum lot sizes of 7,200 square feet, but do lot sizes that are similar along Mission, if not larger, of maybe 10,000 to a half an acre. Yeah. So we do, when you drive in that area, you can say, you know what? This is definitely not your typical neighborhood in Loma Linda. Right away, you should be able to tell that you are definitely a unique space. So I'm glad you're here to remind us that we need to play a more proactive role in ensuring that all those things do take place, because a lot of time and energy has been put into this by many other people before us. So the baton is handed to us, and we need to make sure we follow through with it.
Thank you.
How do you raise money to create more awareness and sustain this kind of an effort?
Well, one way I think is the model of the Barton House in Redlands, where historic building is used as a professional rental. And I think that's the model that we are anticipating for Heritage Park. Not that those buildings will just sit there and wait 3 months until somebody shows up to take a tour of a museum or something. But we, as a commission, we've recommended all along that all or most of the buildings within that park be leased out on a regular basis for low-impact professional use. And I think that's the direction that staff is continuing to go. So that helps to at least add to the general budget. I think anything to do with history is going to be likely funded by volunteers and by donations. People ask me all the time, well, aren't there state monies for historic preservation? Yes, there are, and they almost always go to things like restoring the state capitol, restoring courthouses in Sacramento, state parks, and things like that. So it's very, very limited, and it almost never siphons down to the local level. So really, what we do is what we do. It's our commitment to it. So that's one of the reasons why we recommended that Heritage Park have a cash flow. And I think we're close to that, to at least the cell tower and some leasing of buildings. There will be some money coming back in to continue upkeep. Because if you just set all this stuff aside and you don't really have a purpose for it, you don't have a way for it to generate money, sooner or later somebody's going to give it the axe. And we don't want that. We want everything that we save to be useful. And it can contribute to the story of the community, but also can contribute to the life of the community. So we'd like to see weddings and receptions and parties and things like that take place in Heritage Park as well, that potentially could.
And I know we have from time to time citizens and students that move in that would like to get engaged in the community and so forth. Would this be one option? Are you looking for volunteers? And if
we
so,
have had some volunteer occasions in Heritage Park. I think when the Frank Adobe comes up for preservation, there may be opportunities there for some volunteer work. Certainly if we ever actually have a community museum, we would need docents and people who get some training and are able to give tours and explain things. We do have the history fair from time to time, and we try to keep interest alive because, believe me, I know the history of some other communities, and ours is just as interesting and just as varied and important as any others. You know, I didn't even talk at all about Loma Linda and the university and medical center and all of that. But when you add all that into the earlier mix of what happened in the Mission District, we have a tremendous history.
And anyone that's interested can contact either you through the
staff, through the planning. There is also a historical society, the Loma Linda Parks and Historical Society, which is a nonprofit group. And it's a very tiny group, and it would love to grow.
Okay.
People in Loma Linda are exceedingly busy, and we recognize that. A lot of volunteer work goes on, but it's already dedicated to health professional things and church-related things. So we understand we have to get our ration of interest.
I've heard you share some of this before, but I feel like I always learn something new. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. We appreciate your support.
Thank you.
I have a question for staff. Are we any closer to seeing any of these developments coming through?
Short answer is yes. We're an environmental for, actually the track map you guys approved for those 30-some units on the east side of California.
Is that the only thing on the east side, or is that?
No, there will be another, ultimately about 110 in 2 phases farther east of that. And then the 2 pieces in Area D, the Kunahara property and then the former redevelopment property.
Okay, if there is nothing further, reports of officers, then we are adjourned for the City Council, and the next is our successor agency to the Loma Linda Redevelopment Agency. Are there any items to be added or deleted?
No, sir.
Would the public like to speak on any items not on the agenda? No takers. The consent calendar is there for your approval.
I'll move it.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, it's approved. We're adjourned for that agenda. The Housing Authority comes to order. Any added or deleted items?
No, sir.
Any public comment on non-agenda items? No takers. The consent calendar.
Not much there. I'll move it.
Second.
Motion is second. Any opposition? Hearing none, it's approved. Any chair member reports? Any reports of officers? Hearing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.